They say the truth will set you free, but sometimes it just digs up graves you hoped would stay buried. This happened in 1979, in a small town so far from everything else that you'd miss it if you blinked between gas stations. We had one stoplight, 2 churches, and a general store that also served as the post office, bait shop, and town gossip exchange. And everyone knew better than to talk too loud when something smelled off. I was 12 the year it happened. My cousin Jesse was 10. He lived across the road with his mom, Aunt Lorraine, my dad's sister. My folks helped raise him after his dad skipped town, which meant Jesse and I were more like brothers. We fished together, built tree forts, got in trouble for stealing peaches off old man McLean's orchard fence. Then one day, he didn't come home from school. That was the beginning. It was a Wednesday, late April. The sky had that gray color like rain was thinking about it, but hadn't made up its mind. Jesse had detention for throwing a paper plane at Miss Templeton's bun, so he was supposed to walk home late. But dinner time came, and then sunset, and Jesse didn't show. Aunt Lorraine called my dad. I remember the way his face changed when he answered the phone, like someone had flipped a switch and drained all the color out of him. He didn't call the police. He didn't drive to the school. He didn't do any of the things you're supposed to do when a kid goes missing. He hung up the phone, looked at me, and said, "You stay inside tonight, Matthew." Then he locked the front door. It wasn't until years later that I realized what he did next, and what it meant, because the truth is, we never reported Jesse missing. And it wasn't because we didn't care. It was because we knew exactly who took him, and we were going to handle it ourselves. That night, I watched from the window as my dad slipped out the back door and crossed the road to Aunt Lorraine's. He didn't turn on the porch light, didn't knock, just walked right in. I saw shadows moving in the living room, heard muffled voices, nothing distinct. Then he came back out with Uncle Dale. Now, Dale wasn't our real uncle. Not by blood. He was Lorraine's cousin through marriage, one of those family by proximity types who showed up to every cookout with a six-pack and stories he shouldn't be telling around kids. He worked at the mill, chewed tobacco like it was keeping him alive, and had a temper that everyone knew not to poke too hard. The two of them climbed into Dad's truck. No headlights, just tail lights disappearing down the gravel road toward the old rail yard. I waited up for hours, but they didn't come back that night. When I asked Mom the next morning where Dad was, she just said, "Helping your aunt," and went back to stirring oatmeal like it was any other Thursday. But the town felt different. People were quiet, tense, eyes darting. The kind of mood you feel in a church just before a funeral, when everyone already knows what's coming, but no one wants to be the one to say it. And still, no police, no flyers, no announcements, no questions. The school sent home a notice that Jesse had been marked absent due to personal family reasons. His name was never mentioned over the intercom, never prayed for in Sunday service. It was like he had never existed. I started asking questions, quietly, to friends, to neighbors. But everyone clammed up. Then, 2 days later, I saw it. The red pickup truck. It was parked on the far end of the feed store parking lot, behind the propane tanks. Rusted fenders, busted taillight, camper shell with a missing window. I didn't know whose it was at the time, but I recognized it. I'd seen it before. 2 weeks earlier, it had been sitting across the street from the school when Jesse and I walked home. The driver was a heavy-set man in a green ball cap. He didn't wave, didn't nod, just sat there, engine running, staring. At the time, I figured he was just someone's uncle waiting for a kid. But now, looking back, that was the first time I saw Ray Muncie, the man who took my cousin, and the man my father had gone to find. Ray Muncie wasn't from our town, but he was known. He lived 2 counties over, ran a junkyard that never paid taxes, and had a reputation that made grown men lock their doors in daylight. Everyone had heard a different story about him. That he'd done time, that he used to run girls, that he'd once buried a dog alive just to make a point. And somehow, he was still walking free. I didn't know all that then, not at 12. But I knew fear, and when I saw that red truck, I felt it like a punch to the chest. The next morning, my dad came back. He looked like he hadn't slept, eyes red, face drawn, jeans soaked with mud halfway to the knee. He didn't say anything to me, just went straight to the garage and started sharpening his pocket knife. That sound stuck with me. The rhythm of it, steel on steel, calm, intentional. Later that afternoon, I overheard him talking to Uncle Dale out back, voices low but tight. I crept under the porch to listen, a trick I'd used since I was small. Dad said he had the boy out in the hollow, tied up in the back of that junk trailer, barely breathing. I covered my mouth. I felt cold all over. Uncle Dale spat. "And you left him?" "Had to. He wasn't alone. Guy's got 2 dogs and a goddamn shotgun." "Then we go tonight." Dad didn't answer, just let the silence hang. That night, just after midnight, I saw them load up the truck, rope, shovel, my dad's old hunting rifle wrapped in a blanket. And then they were gone. I didn't sleep. I just sat at the window watching the empty road, heart beating like a drum. They came back just before dawn. The truck was filthy, mud, branches, streaks of something dark. My dad had blood on his sleeve. Uncle Dale looked like he'd aged 10 years in one night. And in the bed of the truck, wrapped in a quilt, Jesse. He was alive. Eyes closed, skin pale, lips cracked, but breathing. My mother helped carry him inside without a word. Aunt Lorraine followed, crying into a dish towel. No one said anything to me. I just stood there, invisible, watching as my family pulled my cousin back from wherever he'd been. And still, no one called the police. Because whatever happened out there in the hollow wasn't meant for lawmen. Jesse didn't talk for 2 days. Not a word. He lay in my old bed, because it was closer to the kitchen, where Aunt Lorraine could check on him every 10 minutes. She fed him soup through a spoon and whispered prayers under her breath, like she could pull the sickness out of him if she prayed hard enough. When he did speak, it was to me. I was sitting on the floor, building a puzzle just to fill the silence, when he said, "Did he find you too?" I froze. "Who?" I asked. Jesse didn't look at me. He just stared at the ceiling. The man in the red truck. He told me everything, in pieces, broken sentences, pauses so long I thought he'd fallen asleep. Ray had offered him a ride home outside the school, said Aunt Lorraine had sent him. Jesse didn't trust him, but he was 10. 10-year-olds still believe adults wear capes under their jackets. The moment he got in the truck, the doors locked. Ray drove him out past the quarry, into the woods, down an old logging trail to a rusted trailer near a dry creek bed. No windows. Padlock on the outside. Inside, just a mattress and a 5-gallon bucket. He kept Jesse tied at the wrists, gagged at night, gave him water and canned beans, talked to him like he was a pet, said he was keeping him safe, that the world was too cruel for boys like him. Jesse said he tried not to cry, said Ray didn't like crying. The second night, Ray brought in a box of old toys, said they'd be a family now. That's when Jesse realized Ray didn't plan on letting him go. I sat there on the floor, fists clenched, stomach turning. "Did he hurt you?" I asked. Jesse blinked. "No," he said. "Not like that. Just scared me." He looked at me, finally. "But your dad came." I heard him outside, heard him say my name. He smiled just a little. That's when I knew I'd be okay. And I realized then why my father had never called the police. Because if they had shown up, they wouldn't have gotten there in time. And if they had, Ray Muncie might have walked away, like he always did. But Dad didn't give him that chance. I was too young then to understand everything that had happened. Too young to know what trauma looked like when it lived inside someone's bones. Too young to realize how quiet a family can get when it chooses silence over justice. But even at 12, I knew something terrible had been done, and something worse had been covered up. The day after Jesse started talking again, Uncle Dale came over with 2 cups of coffee and a dirt-caked shovel in the back of his truck. He and my dad sat on the porch and spoke in voices too low for me to hear. Then Dale left without saying goodbye. That night, I waited until my parents were asleep. I crept downstairs, careful not to hit the creaky step near the landing. I slipped out the back door and crossed the yard barefoot in the dark. The garage smelled like oil and sawdust. My dad kept a locked cabinet there, always had. That night, it was unlocked. Inside, wrapped in an old military tarp, was the hunting rifle. And beside it, buried beneath a stack of rags, was a shoebox. Inside the shoebox, a man's wallet, a broken wristwatch, and a green ball cap, the one Ray Muncie wore. I snapped the box closed and put everything back exactly the way I found it. But I didn't sleep that night. And from then on, I never looked at my father the same way. A week later, Ray's red truck was found abandoned at the bottom of a ravine 2 towns over. Authorities assumed it had rolled off the road and been stripped for parts. No one came to claim it. No one filed a missing persons report. The sheriff chalked it up to hill folk business. That was his way of saying, not my problem, without getting his hands dirty. No one ever saw Ray Muncie again, not officially. But about a year later, during a particularly heavy flood, bones washed out from a collapsed creek bed not far from the old mill road. A hunter found them. Sheriff said it was an animal grave. Deer, maybe. But I knew better. So did Dad. He didn't say anything, but he started locking the garage again. Time passed, like it always does in towns like ours. Slow, stubborn, and without ceremony. Jesse got older, grew tall, got quiet. He didn't talk about what happened. Not to me, not to anyone. He quit football in high school. Started working nights at the mill with Uncle Dale. Always kept to himself. Never dated. Never left town. People said he was sensitive. Said the kidnapping had made him cautious. But I knew the truth. It didn't make him cautious. It made him watchful. Jesse never stood with his back to a door. Never sat near windows. Never answered calls from unknown numbers. He lived like someone who knew the world had teeth. And he'd already been bitten once. As for me, I left town the moment I turned 18. Went to trade school, became a lineman, built a life 2 states over, got married, had a daughter, never told my wife the full story. But I thought about it, all the time. Every time I heard about a missing kid on the news, every time I drove past a trailer on the edge of the woods, every time I caught my reflection and saw my father's eyes looking back. He passed away in 2003. Stroke, quick, no warning. At his funeral, men I hadn't seen in decades came out of the woodwork, men with strong handshakes and tired eyes. I didn't ask questions, neither did they. But Uncle Dale pulled me aside behind the church afterward and handed me a small metal box. "Your dad wanted you to have this," he said. Inside were a handful of things. a pocket knife, a compass, a worn photograph of Jesse and me fishing in '78, and a note handwritten in my father's careful scrawl, "There are men the law can't touch." That doesn't mean they shouldn't answer. I never showed it to anyone, not even Jesse. Especially not Jesse. It was Jesse who called me. That alone was strange. He hardly ever picked up the phone, let alone dialed. When I answered, his voice was tight. "She's asking questions," he said. "You need to come home." "Who is?" "A reporter, young, out of state. Says she's doing a series on rural cold cases. Says she wants to talk about Ray Muncie." That name hadn't passed between us in years. I asked how she found him. Jessie said she was digging through public arrest records and found Muncie's name connected to an old complaint about a different kid. One that got tossed out in 1977. She'd tracked his movements through truck registrations, junkyard permits, and somehow linked him to our town. And to Jessie. I drove out that weekend. The town hadn't changed much. Just a few more boarded windows, a few more grayer heads. Aunt Lorraine's house still smelled like old wood and sweet tea. Jesse was thinner now, paler. The kind of man who looked like he'd spent a lifetime bracing for an earthquake that never quite came. "She's staying at the church rectory," he said. "You should talk to her. She's not like the others." I found her sitting under the elm tree beside the chapel. Mid-20s. Too smart for her own good. She introduced herself as Morgan Green, freelance investigative journalist out of Baton Rouge. "I'm not here to cause trouble," she said. "I'm here because some people don't get to stay buried." I didn't say much, just listened. She laid out her findings. Ray's history, his missing persons rumors, the abandoned red truck, the bones found by the creek. And then, the part that made my blood run cold. "I know your father was the last person seen driving toward the hollow the night Jesse disappeared," she said. "Locals won't say it, but I think they know." She leaned in. "Did your family kill him?" I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said, "No, because technically I didn't know. I wasn't there. And also, because some truths don't belong on tape." She didn't believe me, not really. But she nodded. "If you ever want to tell your story," she said, "I'll be back." She left the next morning, never published anything. Maybe she saw in our eyes what that story would cost. Maybe she saw it in Jesse. He never asked me what I told her. But that night, we sat on the porch like we used to. And he said something I'll never forget. I wish he hadn't died easy. Last fall, Jesse died in his sleep. Massive heart failure. Quiet, painless, the doctor said. But not to me. To me, it was like the last light went out in a house I'd spent my whole life inside. I came back to town for the funeral. Small service, pine box. The church pews were half full, but the silence was louder than grief. No one talked about what had happened. No one ever had. Not the neighbors, not the sheriff, not even the preacher. The town had long ago decided that whatever had happened to Jesse wasn't their business. And what had been done in return, even less so. After the burial, I went for a walk, past the mill, past the old feed store, all the way out to the bend in the road where the trail to the hollow used to begin. It's grown over now, trees thick as fence posts, weeds waist high. But I knew where the clearing was. I followed instinct more than memory. And there, under a bent pine, I found it. A mound, barely noticeable. No marker. Just the faintest impression of disturbed earth, softened by 40 years of wind and rain. I stood there a long time, not to mourn, not to confess, just to let him know I still remembered. And maybe to let him know I didn't regret it. Because Jesse lived, and Ray Muncie didn't. We never told the police. We never wrote down what happened. But we didn't forget. You can call it vigilante justice. You can call it revenge. You can say we should have trusted the law. But where we're from, the law didn't protect people like Jesse. Family did. And sometimes, when the law looks the other way, you dig the hole yourself. Thank you for spending this time with me. If you enjoyed the story, give it a like and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next one.